What's up, college football fans? Jack here, another episode of the Big and Bold College Football Show. And today I'm breaking down this weekend's very good slate of games. In fact, I think that this is the best weekend of college football up to this point and could be the best weekend of games all year. So you definitely want to listen to this breakdown. The agenda for today, I'm going to start off talking about the best game of the weekend. Easy choice at this point. Not the game that in the offseason I thought was going to be the best game of the week, but with how the first 5 weeks of college football have played out, here we are, and this is by far easily the best game to break down. And then after that, I'm going to go across each conference. I've got a game of conference that I want to talk about, but I've got rapid fire SEC games to very quickly break down. I think that this is easily the best weekend in college football up to this point, and could be for the entire year. But like I said, going to talk about at least one game a conference, and then I'm going to rapid fire a long list of SEC games this weekend that I think you should pay attention to. There's definitely going to be a big power swing that happen in the SEC after this weekend, depending on how some of these games go. So without further ado, I'm going to start talking about third-ranked Iowa taking on fourth-ranked Penn State. This is a huge game. It's going on in Iowa. Home field advantage for the Hawkeyes. So I'm going to spend a bit more time on this than any other game I'm going to talk about, just for the sake of time for the episode. But as I said, best game of the weekend, third-ranked Iowa, fourth-ranked Penn State. These two teams are walking into the year on fairly even footing. Both teams are known for their defense. Their offenses haven't been fantastic, but they've done more than enough to win them games. So far, Penn State has went on the road to Wisconsin, beat a 12th-ranked Wisconsin to start the year, 16-10. It was a very gritty game. And their other most impressive win was playing 22nd-ranked Auburn in a whiteout at home, winning 28-20 in that matchup. They also goose-egged Indiana, beating them 24-0. So overall, they're a very balanced team. I don't think they lean in any one direction too far on offense or defense. I guess you could argue that the defense is probably what they're going to try to rely on. But if you want to talk about defense, look at Iowa. I mean, Iowa's defense has been terrifying this year. I'll get into it more in a little bit. But so far on the year, they started off taking down 17th-ranked Indiana, 34-6. And then they beat 9th-ranked Iowa State on the road. Last few matchups haven't been quite as difficult. They did struggle, though, against Colorado State, but ended up pulling out and winning by 10 points. And they went on the road to Maryland to destroy Tagovailoa and that Maryland defense, 54-14. Although, credit to the Maryland defense to a degree, Tagovailoa did throw 5 interceptions, so it's kind of hard to keep points off the board when you throw 5 picks. But that's where these two teams are so far on the year, and let's break down this matchup. Now, neither team has been particularly impressive offensively. That's where I'd like to start when talking about these two teams. The basis for any good offense should be the run, in my opinion. You can, of course, be a pass-heavy offense, but in the Big Ten, you got to have a good run game to complement your passing game. Now, on the surface, it would appear neither team's run game is much better than the other. I'm going to list off their rushing stats and not tell you which team is which. 630 yards, 3.4 yards a carry, and 10 rushing touchdowns. Other team, 663 yards, which is 3.8 yards a carry, and 6 rushing touchdowns. No big difference there, right? The first team is Iowa, the second Penn State. Now, I do think, however, Iowa has a slight advantage on the ground because when you look at who's making up those rushing numbers, Tyler Goodson has 430 yards and 5 touchdowns on the ground. Behind him is Ivory Kelly-Martin, 153 yards, which is good for 4.8 yards a carry. So he hasn't touched the ball too much this year, but he's a good change of pace back. And then for Penn State, you have Noah Cain leading the way. Their leading rusher, unlike Iowa, Tyler Goodson coming in for 430 yards, Noah Cain has 187 yards and 3 touchdowns on the season. Behind him is Kayvon Lee, who has 174 yards on the year. So you're thinking, why do these two teams have such similar rushing stats? I mean, you have these what appear to be more gaudy rushing numbers for Tyler Goodson. Kelly-Martin is an okay change of pace guy. And then Cain and Lee for Penn State, not nearly as impressive. Well, Sean Clifford has 137 yards on the ground himself. John Lovett at running back, 95 yards. So it adds up. They're just running the ball with more guys than Iowa is, who I'm not going to say they one-dimensional run game, but they rely on Tyler Goodson at running back. Whereas Penn State, they're not relying on any one guy. So ultimately, I think that the run game advantage probably goes to Iowa, but on the surface, either team can run the football. And I talked about Sean Clifford's rushing ability. No, he doesn't have Adrian Martinez-like rushing numbers. You know, if you're a Nebraska fan, you know what I'm talking about. But when you compare it to Spencer Petras, who has negative 50 rushing yards on the season, and I don't know how many positive gains he's had on the ground running the football, but he's not a very mobile quarterback. He almost looks a little bit like Ben Roethlisberger in the pocket. Not to make too extreme of a comparison, but he's a bigger quarterback. He stands firm in the pocket, takes shots, just not one to move with his feet. He has 943 yards through the air, 7 touchdowns to 1 interception, 3 of those coming last week against Maryland, versus Sean Clifford, who has 1,300 yards on the year, 11 touchdowns and 3 interceptions. So Sean Clifford, he's thrown the ball more, completed more attempts, thrown more passes. He's definitely had a better year through the air for Penn State. So you can give the quarterback advantage to Penn State, but you just have 2 different quarterbacks. You have Sean Clifford. He throws the ball more, has a bit more experience with the passing game in that way, able to run the ball better than Spencer Petras, but Spencer Petras is a big quarterback, stands firm in the pocket, and has a very strong arm. And they have a good couple of receivers there at Iowa. Laporta at tight end. Their second leading receiver is actually Tyler Goodson at running back himself. Versus Penn State, who Dotson and Washington really lead the way for them catching the football. And Jahan Dotson, mind you, very impactful wide receiver, over 440 yards and 6 touchdowns on the season. So offensively, things are really close here. I mean, you could say, hey, I really like Sean Clifford and Jahan Dotson, but looking at Iowa, Spencer Petras can definitely be a game changer for them. Tyler Goodson is a very good running back. But that's not really why we're here, right? That's not what we're all looking at in this game. What we're looking at is the defenses. Whose defense is going to come out on top in this matchup? That's really the main conversation here. Obviously, Iowa's defense has been pretty terrifying. They have 13 sacks on the season and 12 interceptions already, versus a Penn State defense who has 8 sacks and 7 interceptions on the season. Both are led by very talented linebackers. Brandon Smith, former 5-star recruit, phenomenal linebacker there for Penn State, versus Jack Campbell at linebacker, the sort of head of the defense for Iowa. Now, Iowa defensively is certainly led by their secondary thus far, but guys like Zach Van Valkenburg, Lucas Van Ness on the defensive line, those guys can get in your face, and Iowa isn't going to do anything too crazy defensively in my mind to try and beat Penn State. I think they're going to do what they've done all year. It's going to be a grudge match. They're going to run the ball, operate their offense exactly how they want to, and not let the Penn State defense interfere with that. And over the course of the football game, they're going to wait for that mistake. They're going to wait for that turnover. Now, people seem to be of the belief that if Iowa doesn't get 2 turnovers or more in this game, it's going to be really difficult to beat Penn State. But as I said, you look at their defense, they smother people, and offensively, they can score points. I mean, Tyler Goodson and Spencer Petras, good quarterback, running back duo there. Maybe Sean Clifford is the better quarterback in this matchup. But going against that Iowa defense, I think that it's a very level field there between him and Spencer Petras. Because Iowa's defense is pretty terrifying. And quite frankly, with the home field advantage, I want to give this one to Iowa. I have it being a close game, obviously a battle, but I think Iowa's going to win 23-17 and remain a playoff team. I'm not particularly impressed with Penn State because I haven't seen them dominate anyone yet of worth. You know what I mean? They beat Wisconsin by 6. They beat Auburn by 8. And Indiana's having a terrible season. So yeah, they goose-egged them, but Indiana's not a very good team this year. Versus an Iowa team that dominated Indiana to start the season themselves. looked very impressive against Iowa State and dominated Maryland in Maryland. Granted, Maryland's not a great team, don't get me wrong, but I'm going to take the more dominant team that has that sort of A plus on their roster, right? That defense, especially that secondary, is an A plus so far on the year. That is partially why I'm taking Iowa, not to mention the home field advantage. So this game could certainly go either way and bite me in the butt, but I'm going to go ahead and take Iowa in this matchup. Key players for the game, Jahan Dotson, obviously for Penn State. They're going to need him to break this game open. He's going to have to do what they did week 1 against Wisconsin, where not only once but twice, I think they were only able to connect on one, but he was wide open down the field, broken play in the Wisconsin secondary. And Sean Clifford was able to hit him deep and bust the game open for a touchdown. That's the kind of thing they're going to need in this game to take down Iowa. And for Iowa, I think their key player in this matchup is Tyler Goodson. I'm not going to try to reinvent the wheel on this one. Tyler Goodson, very good running back, probably their best offensive weapon, who hasn't been able to have a particularly dominant performance yet, but they can use him on the ground or getting the ball in his hands through the air. So he's going to be a really important offensive piece to help take some heat off Spencer Petras. But that's what the game plan, I think. Iowa's just going to try to run that offense how they want to run it, let the defense suffocate Penn State. And over the course of the game, I think that Iowa will slowly but surely separate themselves in this matchup. So, next game on the schedule here, 6th-ranked Oklahoma versus 21st-ranked Texas in Dallas, Texas. This is a pretty iconic matchup here, very historic. Not to mention, both of these teams will, sooner than rather than later, be leaving the Big 12 for the SEC. So this is going to be a Big 12 game I want to cover. Again, very big weekend for games, and this is one of them. Oklahoma's had an interesting year thus far. Not going to go too deep into this one, quite like I did with the Iowa-Penn State game, but really interesting year. I mean, they survive against Tulane by 5 points. Only just barely beat Nebraska, mainly off of Nebraska's mistakes. Survive West Virginia and win that game by 3. They beat Kansas State by 6, but Kansas State played a very good game. I'll give them credit there. So Oklahoma has certainly struggled a little bit in some of these wins. And you can actually credit the defense for some of the offensive struggles. And we like to point out Spencer Rattler, but some of that offensive line play has not been very good. Their run game hasn't been reliant. It's been a good run game, don't get me wrong. Kennedy Brooks in particular, Eric Gray, those guys are solid running backs, but they can't rely on their run game so far this year. So it may be that Spencer Rattler has to go out and win this game for Oklahoma. Versus Texas, who started the year with Hudson Card out there at quarterback, the freshman. I was fine with the move, but it looks like after getting embarrassed by Nebraska, they kind of quickly said, you know what, we're going to have to make a change here. And they go to Casey Thompson. Thompson is certainly better executing the offense for them than what Hudson Card could do, in part because of his athleticism. He's able to run the ball for Texas. They're on a 3-game win streak. Nobody cares that they beat Rice. They dropped 70 points on Texas Tech. And then they went to TCU. I actually was surprised in this game. I had TCU winning this one at home, but lose by 5, 37-32. Texas takes home the win. Really on the back of Bijan Robinson. He is having an incredible season. 650 yards and 7 touchdowns. Good for 6.2 yards a carry. So that former 5-star out of high school having a really good year for them. And Casey Thompson gives them a good boost of energy there at quarterback. And he's a good playmaker for them. But is it enough to beat Oklahoma? Kind of hard to say, right? Time's going to tell with this one. Key players for the game, I actually have Bijan Robinson, of course, because Texas is going to try to control the pace of play, in my opinion. They're going to have to go out and run the ball down Oklahoma's throat because they can't, quite frankly, even score quickly in this game because in all likelihood, they'd be given too much time for Oklahoma to go down and respond themselves. So I think they're going to have to control the pace of play, run the ball out with Robinson, run the ball with Casey Thompson, dominate this game in terms of time of possession. Now, in a lot of games, you look at time of possession, doesn't matter for the outcome. But I think in this game in particular, it really does. And Oklahoma is going to have to rely on Spencer Rattler to kind of get right. You know what I mean? He came into the season last year with a lot of hype, had a lot of good moments, some bad moments, but it's time for him to take over at quarterback. I'm not a big believer in Spencer Rattler, but I do think he's good enough for them to beat Texas. I'm just not ready to say that Texas is going to win this game. I'll take Oklahoma 27-24 in a very close game. I do think it's going to be close. But a key player for Oklahoma, I think, is going to be Nick Bonito. He's their most talented edge rusher, and they're going to need him to set the edge, shut down outside runs by Robinson and Thompson, and contain it. If they're only getting 3 or 4 yards of play, there's no way they win this football game, in my opinion. Or 3 or 4 yards of run, that is. So for me, that's my take on the Oklahoma-Texas game. It's going to be a good game. It's a 12 o'clock Eastern time game. I definitely think that's one that people should keep an eye on, because that could be a very entertaining matchup there. But next up, again, going around the country here, going to spend a couple minutes on this game. Utah at USC. Now people are thinking, why are we talking about Utah USC? These two teams suck, and to a degree they kind of do. But I'll be the first to admit I was wrong on Utah. I thought Utah was going to be a really good team this year. They're 2-2 right now. Lost at BYU, which, no shame, BYU is the 10th ranked team in the country right now. And then they actually lost in overtime 33-31 to San Diego State. That helped elevate San Diego State into the top 25, by the way. But they're coming off a win against Washington State. The problem here for Utah is that this is a road game. They don't do very good on the road at University of Southern California. It's just not something they're very good at doing if you look back at the history of this game. But this isn't the same USC team of the past. They don't rely on their run game very much. Caden Slovis and Jackson Dart have created this weird duo at quarterback where one goes in and then one gets hurt. So I don't even know who's going to be playing quarterback for USC in this game. But either way, I don't think I really trust them. Caden Slovis has taken a step back from his freshman year at USC. The defense isn't playing particularly well. But when you fire your head coach after like 2 games, or whatever it was when USC let go of Clay Helton, that can happen. And USC is not playing for a Pac-12 title, if I'm being quite honest. I think that Utah is still in that mindset to where they can. Now, some of these issues for Utah stems from the quarterback position as well. Believe me, these are 2 programs with issues at quarterback. Charlie Brewer transferred over to Utah from Baylor. I had a lot of confidence in him taking over for them. But he has since decided to answer the transfer portal, and the year has not started well for him. And now Cameron Rising has taken over at quarterback for them. Hasn't thrown an interception yet for Utah, so we'll see if he can keep that trend going. Overall, this is probably going to be a more low-scoring battle, but if you're at all interested in the Pac-12, this is still a pretty significant game in my opinion, because these are 2 teams that need to get their program in the right direction. One of these teams is going to win, and they're going to be crowned as the team that's getting in the right direction, that's kind of correcting the issues that they're having to start the year. I think that's going to be Utah, but time will tell in that matchup. Next up, let's go over to the ACC, sort of. I've got Notre Dame taking on Virginia Tech. Now, yes, Notre Dame is not technically in the ACC, but this was probably the best game of the weekend for the ACC. So they're going to be going to Virginia Tech. Virginia Tech's had an interesting year. They upset North Carolina to start the season. Then they themselves get upset against West Virginia on the road. But Virginia Tech's a very different team at home, and this is going to be a difficult matchup for Notre Dame. Granted, Notre Dame, they're only a 1-loss team. I mean, they've got wins over Florida State in overtime, struggled in that game, struggled against Toledo, even struggled a little bit against Purdue, although Purdue was never really in a position to take the game away from them, but still. And then they dominate the 4th quarter of that Wisconsin game, drop that game to Cincinnati, so now Notre Dame's fallen out of the top 15, and they have a really interesting stream of games. Virginia Tech, USC, North Carolina, Navy. Like, what a weird stretch of games, but that's because they're an independent, so they can play essentially whoever they want. But this Notre Dame game will be interesting. Jack Cohn went down with injury, so he was replaced by Drew Pine, who has played fairly well for them. Problem for Notre Dame is they need to get their run game going. Kyron Williams is a really talented running back who is only averaging 3.8 yards a carry on the season. So If I'm Coach Kelly, I'm trying to get that run game going, really good receiving options for Notre Dame. And that's great, but they're going to become dangerous if their run game gets going. I think next year they're going to be a much better team because their offensive line play hasn't been what it has in years past. Think sort of similar to, say, Wisconsin. But I don't think Virginia Tech has the muscle up front to capitalize upon that. And I don't see them beating not only North Carolina, but also Notre Dame this year. I just don't think Braxton Burmeister is good enough of a quarterback. And again, I think head coach Justin Fuente is going to be placed back on the hot seat with a loss against Notre Dame. But Notre Dame's a good team. They're just not a great team. Now, finally, to wrap it up, again, string of SEC matchups that I want to talk about. For starters, let's talk about Ole Miss taking on Arkansas. Now, I'm really stuck in this game because all year I've been thinking Ole Miss is the most overrated team in college football. They haven't beat anybody good, but now they get a chance at home to play Arkansas. Now, I don't think Ole Miss has a gross amount of advantages over Arkansas in this game. But I'll tell you what they do have is they have a very good play caller at head coach, and they have a very good quarterback in Matt Corral. He's the second best quarterback in the SEC behind Bryce Young at Alabama, and that's really going to give them a big advantage. You know, Arkansas's had a tough year. They go from dominating and grinding on Texas to beating a 7th-ranked Texas A&M because of 2 or 3 big throws. And then they get absolutely steamrolled by Georgia. So what are they, right? I still think Arkansas is a good team. I still think Ole Miss is overrated. I still think Arkansas is a good team. I still think Ole Miss is overrated. But I don't think I'm ready to give this game to Arkansas. This is stylistically a really difficult matchup for them. And when you have the disadvantage at quarterback, that's really tough. I just don't think KJ Jefferson is the guy at quarterback for them. And that's the biggest thing holding them back. They'll probably be able to run on Ole Miss. I don't doubt that at all. But Matt Corral probably going to be able to stand in the pocket and deliver some big throws to get up on Arkansas. And as soon as they take a 10 to 14 point lead, Arkansas is going to have to throw the ball to try and catch up. And I just don't know if they'll be able to. But time will tell with that one. Give me Ole Miss to win the game, but I'm not too confident in that because it's a home game for Arkansas. And they can really turn their year around, again, after getting steamrolled by Georgia. Next up, let's talk about another good SEC matchup. Kentucky taking on LSU. Now, interesting game here. 2 very different teams, and I'll point out what I mean by that. Kentucky's coming off a big win against Florida. I think they've beat Florida like twice in the last 30 years. They're 5-0 and the 16th ranked team in the country, and very deservedly. The way that Kentucky wants to win is by strong game management, grinding with, the football. They don't run up tempo like, say, Michigan does. They just pound the rock with Chris Rodriguez. He's got over 600 yards on the season. And with Will Levis at quarterback, Penn State transfer, he hasn't had an incredible year, 8-6 touchdown interception ratio, but he's an improvement at quarterback over what they've had, and it's more than enough for them to win football games. So between pounding the rock with Chris Rodriguez and good game management, very strong bend but don't break defense, they don't need too many big splash plays or turnovers on defense. They just bend and don't break. And then, of course, you've got Wan'Dale Robinson out there having an incredible year for Kentucky, over 460 yards through the air. So strong defense and run game does a lot for Kentucky versus LSU, who can't run the football to save their life. They're averaging 2.6 yards a carry on the season, only 353 yards on the ground. I mean, Kentucky has 3 times as many yards on the ground as LSU does and over 4 times as many rushing touchdowns. LSU just cannot run the football, and that's a huge issue for them. And their defense, while it hasn't been bad, hasn't been all that good. We talk about that 2019 LSU offense, but their defense was full of NFL caliber talent as well. They really lucked out in that game against Mississippi State, only won that by 3. They gave up a lot of yards on the ground to UCLA. They gave up a lot on the ground to Auburn, although primarily at the hands of Bo Nix because of a Tank Bigsby injury. But regardless of that, their run defense has not been particularly good. And now Derek Stingley Jr. is out at corner. So now their secondary takes a blow. There's most certainly a path where LSU wins this football game. It's because they're going to live and die by the sword of Max Johnson throwing the football. And they certainly have an advantage in their passing game. But with that Kentucky home field advantage, they're going to run the ball and control the clock. Will Levis is going to make just as many plays as he needs to for them to stay up in this game. And I think that defense will bend, and more often than not, I don't think it will break. So I'm willing to bet that Kentucky wins this game, but it will be a close one. Don't get me wrong. It's going to be a close game. And two things are going to happen here. One, Kentucky hopefully will have beaten Florida and LSU in the same season. I don't know how many times that's ever happened. I know it's not a lot. That would be incredible for Kentucky, and they become a borderline top 10 team at that point before they have to go to Georgia, which feels like a guaranteed loss, but in college football, nothing ever is, right? But after that, Mississippi State, Tennessee, Vanderbilt, New Mexico State, Louisville. That's after the Georgia game. Why can't they win all 5 of those games? Now, I'm not saying Kentucky's going to be an 11-1 team, but it looks like Kentucky can exceed some expectations that people have set for them if they win this LSU game in particular. So yeah, give me the Wildcats to win, because when you run the ball better, you play better defense, and you don't have a bum at quarterback, more often than not, at home, you're going to win that football game. And I think that Ed Orgeron is going to get into a very uncomfortable spot at LSU where they fall to 3-3, and it's entirely possible that he is fired after a 3-3 start. Now, he's got an opportunity after that to try and beat Florida, Ole Miss, Alabama, and Arkansas. Guess what? All 4 of those teams are also in the AP poll top 25. So it doesn't get any easier from here after they play Kentucky. I have a feeling Ed Orgeron's about to get fired. Possibly mid-season, possibly after. I don't know, but things are really going by the wayside for them. And beating Kentucky is a big way to turn that around, because Kentucky is beatable. Because LSU has one of the most talented rosters in the country that's seemingly not being utilized. All that talent kind of going to waste, but still a lot of football to be played. So we just have to wait it out and see what happens in that game. And finally, last SEC matchup for you guys. Alabama taking on Texas A&M. Now, no, Texas A&M is not the team we thought they were going to be. Their run game is good, not great. Isaiah Spiller, definitely a talented running back, but they use multiple running backs there. Haynes King was expected, or was the starter at quarterback for them. He's still out with injury, and Zach Calzada hasn't shown anything special at the quarterback position. So quite frankly, whether it was Haynes King or not, I don't think that Texas A&M was going to be a playoff team, but I didn't expect them to lose to Mississippi State. That was kind of an under-the-radar loss there. They lost to Mississippi State 26-22. So it looks like Texas A&M could lose 3 straight games, now playing number 1 Alabama. And really, this just feels like an opportunity for Bryce Young to win the Heisman. I mean, he's already the favorite. The next guy up seemed to be Matt Corral for Ole Miss. And Bryce Young just outdueled Matt Corral last weekend. He's got a 17-2 touchdown-to-interception ratio, which is phenomenal. Having a really good year there at Alabama. I don't see why he doesn't win the Heisman as long as he keeps playing near this level. I don't think Alabama's going to go undefeated, but I don't know who they're going to lose to. You got Auburn, Arkansas, LSU, Mississippi State. I mean, I just don't know. I don't expect them to go undefeated because, believe it or not, Nick Saban's actually lost 1 or 2 games a handful of times at Alabama. In fact, he actually more often than not does over the course of a season. But who's that loss going to be to? Right now, I couldn't say. And as for Texas A&M, just going back to them before we wrap up the episode, they've got a lot of opportunities to try and rebound. But it looks like, in all likelihood, they're going to fall to 3-3. 3 straight losses on the season. They're going to have to rebound at Missouri, which is very doable. And they can most certainly beat South Carolina. Then you got to play Auburn. You got to play Ole Miss. It might come down to that LSU game at the end of the season to dictate which of these coaches has the better year and maybe saves their job. Now, I'm not saying they're going to fire Jimbo Fisher this year, but at Texas A&M, losing to Arkansas, maybe. Mississippi State the following weekend, I don't know. I thought this was going to be a great game heading into the season. Texas A&M's defense is still good, but their offense is pretty putrid. So they're going to have to fix that there in College Station. So we're going to see how that goes. But with that said, though, guys, that's the end of the episode. Definitely a long one. I try to keep the episodes a little shorter for you guys because, it is a long episode. It's a lot of content. But instead of chopping it up into multiple small episodes, I just drop the whole thing for you guys. If you're a Wolverine fan, check out my preview of their upcoming game against Nebraska. Let me know in the comments what you think is going to happen with this Iowa-Penn State game. This is a huge game. My eyes are going to be glued to the television. I'm definitely going to give you guys a great breakdown of that after the game is played. Some instant notes and reactions to that because it's the most impactful game of the weekend. And do you guys think that this is the best weekend for college football up to this point? And do you think it will be all year? I personally think so because there's a lot of SEC matchups that are definitely going to change that sort of pendulum swing in terms of who controls the SEC outside of, say, Alabama, right? And I guess you'd say Georgia as well in this situation. But a lot of good games, and there's great games across all of college football. I mean, Pac-12's got some good ones. Big 12's got some good ones. Big 10. So they're all out there. I wanted to talk about them, get them out there, and just let you guys know what I thought about those games. So thank you for listening, everybody. I hope you enjoyed the episode. Next week, going to change it up a little bit. I'm still trying to figure out how I like to give you guys this content. But thank you for listening. I put a lot of effort and research into this, and so hopefully you guys enjoyed the episode. Again, thank you for listening, and hopefully this is a great weekend of college football.